After Kenny Rogers died, his family found something in a box of old belongings that nobody knew existed. It was small. It was unmarked except for a date, and when they played it, they heard Kenny Rogers' voice saying something that he had never said to anyone, something he had recorded alone in a room in 1976 when he believed nobody would ever hear it. The process of sorting through the belongings of someone who has died is a specific kind of work, not merely the practical task of organizing and deciding and distributing, but the particular emotional work of handling the physical objects of a life, of touching the things that the person touched, of encountering the evidence of who they were in the specific material form that a life leaves behind. Kenny Rogers had lived 81 years. He had accumulated across those years the specific volume of objects that a long life in the music industry produces, the instruments and the recording equipment and the industry memorabilia and the personal effects and the boxes of things that had been moved from house to house across decades without ever quite finding a permanent home, that had accumulated in storage rooms and closets and the particular places where things go when they are not currently needed but have not yet been decided about. His family had been working through these belongings in the weeks after his death in March of 2020, a death that had happened in the specific context of a world that was shutting down around them, that had produced the particular quality of grief that arrives when the normal rituals of mourning are disrupted by circumstances beyond anyone's control, when the people who would have come cannot come, and the gathering that would have happened cannot happen, and the loss has to be processed in conditions that feel inadequate to the size of what has been lost. They had been sorting through the boxes with the patient attention of people who understand that what they are handling is not just objects, but memory, that each item in each box is connected to a person who is no longer there to explain its significance or to say whether it should be kept or given or released. The box was unremarkable. It was the kind of box that accumulates in the storage areas of houses that have been lived in for a long time, cardboard, slightly battered, sealed with tape that had yellowed and dried across the years until it was more symbolic than functional. Inside it, papers and photographs and the various small objects of a life that had been placed in a box at some point for some reason that may or may not have been clear at the time of placing. And among these objects, underneath a layer of papers and beside a collection of photographs that appeared to be from the early 1970s, a cassette tape. It was the kind of cassette tape that belongs to a specific era, the era before digital recording made the physical medium unnecessary, when the cassette was the standard format for the kind of informal recording that musicians do when they are working out ideas, when the song is not yet finished enough for a proper session, but far enough along that the shape of it needs to be preserved before the shape is lost. The tape itself was in the condition of something that had been stored for decades, the plastic slightly faded, the label handwritten in ink that had not entirely survived the years. The handwriting was Kenny's. The label said two things, demo and a year, 1976.
Nobody in the family remembered this tape. This was not surprising. 1976 was 44 years ago, and the specific contents of a cardboard box stored across multiple decades are not the kind of thing that family members are expected to track. But it was notable, because Kenny had been, across the years of his public life, a man who did not leave things unaccounted for, who managed the archive of his career with the specific attention of someone who understood that the material record of a career is part of the career itself, that what is preserved and what is released and what is kept private are choices that matter. A tape that nobody knew about was, in the specific context of a man who managed these things carefully, unusual. They found a cassette player. This required its own search, the specific archaeology of locating a device that had been standard technology in 1976 and that was, by 2020, something that required deliberate finding rather than casual retrieval. They found one. They put the tape in. They pressed play. What came out of the speaker first was the specific sound of old tape, the particular quality of audio that has been recorded on magnetic tape and stored for decades, that carries in its texture the evidence of its age, the slight degradation that time produces in analog recordings, the specific warmth and limitation of the format that was the best available technology of its moment. And then, underneath that texture, a guitar, a single guitar, recorded close in what sounded like a small room, not a professional studio, not a space with the acoustic treatment and the equipment that a proper recording session requires, but the kind of room that a musician uses when the recording is for himself rather than for anyone else. And then, Kenny's voice. Not the Kenny Rogers voice that the world knew, not the voice that had been produced and polished and refined across decades of professional recording, that had been heard by hundreds of millions of people on records and on radio, and in the specific intimate space of whatever room a person is in when music reaches them. This was a younger voice, and a rawer one. The voice of a man in his late 30s who had not yet become what he was going to become, who was recording something in a small room on a cassette tape that nobody had ever heard. He was singing a song about a train, about a night journey and an old man, and a conversation that happened in the particular intimacy of strangers sharing a space for a few hours in the dark. He was singing about cards and about life and about the specific wisdom that comes from understanding what things are worth and what they cost and when to hold and when to let go. The family recognized the melody. They recognized the structure. They recognized with the specific quality of recognition that comes when something familiar arrives in an unfamiliar form what song this was, or rather, what song this would become. This was The Gambler, but not the version the world knew. This was before Don Schlitz, before the Grammy, before the 35 million people who had watched the television movie, before any of it. This was the first version, Kenny's version, written in 1976, alone in a small room on a cassette tape that nobody had ever heard.
The details were different. The old man on the train was more specific in this version, had a name, had a history that the released version had pared away in favor of the universal, had the particular quality of someone that Kenny had actually encountered or imagined encountering rather than the more archetypal figure that the final song presented. The philosophy was the same, the holding and the folding and the walking away, but the language around it was rawer, less polished, more personal. This was the song before the song had been edited for the world. This was the song as Kenny had written it for himself. The family sat with this for a long time. They listened to the tape through, the song in its raw version, the guitar and the younger voice and the small room and the decades of storage, all audible simultaneously in the specific texture of what was coming through the speaker. The song ended. There was the particular silence of a tape that has reached the end of its content, the slight hiss of the blank tape continuing to run. And then Kenny's voice again, not singing, speaking, quietly in the specific tone of someone who is not addressing anyone, who has forgotten or has never considered that the record button is still pressed, that the tape is still running, that what is being said is being preserved in the same magnetic medium that the song was preserved in. He was speaking to himself, or to no one, or to whatever version of the future he could imagine in 1976 that might someday find this tape and hear what was on it. He said, "This is my last chance." Not the last chance in the casual sense that people use the phrase when they mean the latest in a series of attempts, the last chance in the specific sense of someone who has done the accounting and has arrived at a number that does not leave much room. He said, if this doesn't work, if this song doesn't find someone who can do something with it, if this is just another thing that almost happened, I'm going home. He said it without self-pity and without drama and without the performance of someone who wants to be overheard saying something significant. He said it with the specific flatness of someone stating a fact that they have already accepted, a fact that is not comfortable but that has been processed to the point where the stating of it does not require anything from the voice except the truth. He said, Houston is still there. My family is still there.
There are things I can do that are not this, and if this is not going to happen, if this is the version of my life where the music doesn't work, then I need to go do those things before I run out of time to do them." He paused. The tape hissed. Then he said, "But I think this song is good. I think this song is the best thing I've written, and I'm going to find someone who can hear it. And if I can't find anyone, then at least I said it. At least it exists somewhere, even if it's just on this tape in this room that nobody will ever find." The tape ran on for a few more seconds. Then it ended. The cassette player clicked. The room was quiet.
The family sat in the quiet for a long time. They had come into this room to sort through boxes, to do the practical, necessary work of accounting for a life in its material form. They had not come to find this. They had not known this existed. And now they knew something about Kenny Rogers that Kenny Rogers had never told anyone. That in 1976, alone in a room with a guitar and a cassette player and a song that would not be recorded professionally for 2 more years, he had looked at his own life with the specific honesty of someone who has run out of the energy required for optimism, and had made the deal with himself that people make when they need to make deals. One more try, the best try, and if the best try doesn't work, then something else. The best try had worked. 2 years after that tape, Don Schlitz's version of The Gambler found its way to Kenny. Kenny recorded it. It went to #1. It won a Grammy. It became the defining song of a career that would run for 40 more years after 1976. 40 years of Lady and Islands in the Stream and the television movies and the farewell concert and everything else that the music industry and the world had received from a man who in 1976, in a small room, had been one failed song away from going home. The tape was labeled Demo 1976. It had been in a box for 44 years. Kenny had never mentioned it. He had never, in any interview across the decades of his career, talked about the specific moment in 1976 when he had sat in a room and recorded a song and told himself that this was the last chance. He had told the story of his career in the way that careers are told, forward-looking, built on the evidence of what succeeded rather than the weight of what almost didn't. The private accounting, the small room in the cassette, and the voice speaking to no one about going home had stayed private until the box was opened. Know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away. The old gambler on the train had the philosophy exactly right, and in 1976, in a room that nobody else was in, Kenny Rogers had held on, had decided that the song was good enough for one more try, that Houston could wait a little longer, that the last chance was worth taking. He had been right, but only he had known, until the box was opened, how close the folding had been. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Share this with someone who is one try away from walking away, because sometimes the last chance is the one that works, and sometimes the only difference between going home and staying is the decision to play one more hand. Leave a comment below. What does the gambler mean to you? And don't forget to ring the notification bell for more stories about what we find when we open the boxes, the tapes and the voices and the last chances that nobody knew about until it was too late to ask.